the stupidest thing a teacher ever did at school? Story 1. My chem teacher insisted electricity wasn't invented in the American Civil War. The conversation went like this: Teach, there was no electricity in the Civil War class, but they had the telegraph. Right? Teach, yes class, and the telegraph uses electricity. Right? Teach, yep class, so they had electricity. Teach, there was no electricity in the Civil War. Edit, she was very clear on her stance. She claimed electricity was not invented, yes. She used the word invented, not discovered, and nothing used electricity, period, and humans had no idea what electricity was. Story 2. Teacher needed to fix the projector. Asked if anyone had a screwdriver. No one did. Does anyone have a knife? You won't get in trouble if you do. So a kid gets his pocket knife out. She fixes the projector. Next day the dean comes in for him. Automatic expulsion at my school. The teacher said, "What? I'm a mandated reporter." Edit, since you all liked the first one so much, another knife incident happened as a result of that one, which I reply below. Story 3. In 8th grade, a girl was known for her long hair, and which apparently was never cut in her life. Well, my math teacher at the time took some scissors and snipped some of it off for fun and didn't think it was a big deal. Yeah, she got fired. Story 4. I told the other students an easier way to do a thing mathematically. She became frustrated and told everyone my method was plausible in a classroom, but in the real world, they'd be expected to do it the way she taught us. I really wish I could remember what specifically this was, but after the students realized that for every problem they came across, they could use my easier method, she got frustrated with me and told me that next class I'd be teaching and she would sit in my seat. So that night, I prepared a class study plan, learning techniques taught in the book ahead of where the rest of the class was, and I went in 2 days later. We had a staggered schedule, and I taught the class a new mathematical process. The teacher tried to annoy me by asking questions, but I just answered them and went on with the lecture. Before I was able to finish, she became frustrated and sent me to the principal's office. When I got there, I was asked why I was there. I told them I wasn't sure and that they should ask Mrs. B. Principal came back and said I had disrespected the teacher. Honestly, I can see it, but I did do as she asked and taught her class. Story 5. When I was in high school, my chemistry teacher demonstrated how electricity separates the oxygen and hydrogen atoms in water molecules. He had the complete setup and isolated the hydrogen in a fairly large glass container and capped it. Then he asked the magic question: if I was to drop a flame into this container, what would happen? A fireball, I responded. He snorted, rolled his eyes, and looked at the A student, who only did well because he bought the teacher's edition of the textbook online. Wrong. Explained to Idiocracy Orchids. Why, Joey? Smart kid Joey scoffed at me and flippantly said, because it needs oxygen to combust. Duh. Right, smirked my teacher. There is no oxygen present in this container, therefore the flame will be deprived of fuel and go out. I couldn't believe their stupidity and just shook my head. Just before the fireball engulfed my teacher's face, burning off his eyebrows and causing him to throw himself backwards so hard he rolled over his lab table and fell off. Dislocating his shoulder, I turned to my friend and whispered, "Gee, I wonder what the hydrogen is going to mix with the second he opens that container." Story 6. Class trip. My GR8 teacher is known as a weird person. During a camp trip of the class, we were separated into boys-girls for obvious reasons, with our own bathrooms and shower area. During one night, while the girls were showering, my teacher, who was a 50-year-old man, decided it would be a funny joke to take pictures of the girls underneath the shower doors. Try to say he wanted them for the yearbook and to see their surprised reactions of these candid pictures. Needless to say, big problem, but no matter how many times had been reported, nothing ever happened. Too many stories about this teacher that should have had legal action, from rubbing the inner thigh of a student in his car to being out in a kilt and propping his leg up on a desk like Captain Morgan. Story 7. I had a teacher cut their finger off with a paper guillotine while demonstrating how to safely use it. In their defense, it worked wonders, as everyone was so traumatized by what could happen that no one messed around with the guillotines, ever. Story 8. Chemistry teacher did a chemistry as magic show like this one, and his finale was spreading a chemical powder over his lab table, tapping it with a rod, and producing a near-harmless but spectacular fireball that rose to the ceiling. This time was different. He tapped the powder, and the heavy lab table exploded and shattered. Thankfully, no one was injured, but he immediately started screaming at the class, accusing students of tampering with his chemicals. It turns out he had left the chemical open to the air, allowing too much oxygen to mix with the powder and increasing the reaction by multiple magnitudes. He was reprimanded, but kept his job. TLDR chemistry teacher blew up his desk in front of a class and blamed the students for his dangerous mistake. Story 9. Question: on a test in elementary school, what is a shadow? My answer: an area with less light. Teacher's correction: wrong. An area with no light. Story 10. Had with a student sent her IMs on a public school computer, got her pregnant, got fired, stole all the computers out of the iMac lab at school before leaving, got arrested, married the girl, divorced a few years later, edited too. It seems some people think I'm the teacher. I was a student at the school. Story 11, she tried to tell us a trick to spell athlete. Was that A? Everybody just wrote it down. I kept looking at it. That's not right, is it? I looked it up in a dictionary that I could reach and raised my hand. She got embarrassed and gave me a hard time after that, like I was showing her up. What did I do? You're the one who was telling us the wrong thing. Story 12, my teacher told me I was coloring myself in wrong. Apparently, no one has brown eyes. Everyone has green or blue. I have brown eyes. I tried to tell her she was wrong, but she told me off and took my crayons, banning me from coloring from the rest of the year. Story 13, I had a teacher who made us do this assignment where we would come up with an opinion on anything, and then he would argue the opposite viewpoint. After the first 3 people, it became apparent he just wanted to stroke his own ego. A man in his early 60s arguing, yelling with 13-year-olds. He was really putting people down too. One of my friends was 20th of 30 to be called on. She said, I don't think the Holocaust should have happened. He lost his mind. He sent her to the office, and the assignment was over for the day. Read a chapter from the book in silence. She was a legend, 10th grade, a girl who hung out with some people in my squad, needed to pee. Instructor wouldn't let her leave. Girl asked again, and again, and again. Instructor got pissed off and told her head, give her a week detention if she asked again or left for the bathroom. She did the pee dance in her chair. He pretended not to notice. Suddenly she runs out with her face covered, crying audibly. He's yelling at her until a student tells him to stop. She ended up peeing herself. It was all over her seat and the floor, all because the instructor wanted to assert his dominance. Not sure what happened to the instructor. Story 14, I was 7 years old and was taking a basic spelling quiz in class. My teacher counted every word wrong, even though they were all correct, because I put a period after every word. Obviously, there's no need for a period, but 7 years old me was thinking well. I was taught to always put a period after the last word of a sentence. Young me was just confused more than anything. My mom actually called in to complain, which never happened. She typically didn't get involved when I got involved in conflict at school. That's when it clicked how stupid it was for the teacher to do that. Instead of the teacher approaching me and saying, you see, kiddo foreigner, periods aren't necessary here. Don't do that anymore. She just confused the out of me. Story 15, when I was in 3rd grade, my teacher wrote 1 to 2 on the chalkboard. I said -1. She told me the correct answer is that it doesn't work out. I'm still mad about this 16 years later. Story 16, one of my teachers asked me to deliver a note to one of the gym teachers. When I got to the teacher's office, I knocked on the door so I could be let in. The teacher lost it. Do you not know how to knock correctly? That was very rude. To show me the correct way to knock, she sends out her aide who goes outside, closes the door, and knocks the exact same way I did. The teacher then says, see the difference? How much nicer that was, Mino. Sounds the exact same as I knocked. Hey, erase your note, bye. Lady was a psycho. Story 17, we had a teacher that was always chewing gum. Whenever his gum fell on the blackboard shelf, he would take that chalk-coated thing and put it right on his mouth again. Story 18, I wish I was joking about this. This happened in a preschool classroom in like 94-ish, some context beforehand. I had just had some dental work the day or so prior because I faceplayed on the sidewalk. So I'm in classroom with 30 or so kids eating our usual lunch. That day, cut up hot dog and mac and cheese were on the menu. I think I ate a bite or two and realized, ouch, this isn't working. I remember this vividly. I walked to the trash, can throw my paper plate full of food first onto a pile of other kids' food. Well, the teacher or assistant didn't like that I wasted food and didn't eat, so they scooped it all back up on the plate and pretty much forced me to eat it. I did, but didn't physically force me because I didn't want to get in trouble, crying the whole time, and yeah, told my mom after school. She stormed in the office and raised considering she had discussed this prior. Still pisses me off. Thank you, everybody. By the way, it was Pinecrest K-12. They had preschool there at the time in San Fernando, California. Not sure what happened to the teacher. My memories only cares about those traumatic experiences. My most liked comment is about eating food out of the trash can. Yay me. Story 19, it'll give a little bit of backstory. My younger brother has some learning disabilities, and it led him to having trouble learning to tie shoes. He didn't learn until roughly 1st or 2nd grade. Well, he had this 60 to 70-year-old kindergarten teacher, and in the first week, she called my mom in to discuss my brother. She went off about how he's a terrible student and this, and that she hadn't bothered to read his file as he had been in speech therapy and the like from 2 years old, and it really upset my mom. The worst part of it is at the end of this, she had the audacity to give my mom his gym shoes, which were Velcro, and say he will need new gym shoes as we don't allow retard shoes in this class. Needless to say, her teaching career didn't last too much longer after that. Story 20, we had an older teacher who was a few screws short of a dozen. A pigeon flew in his classroom one day. He decided to chase it out. He didn't just swat at it or guide it with a broom or something. No, his bright idea was to imitate it and try to coax it into the hall. So he starts flapping his arms and cooing. He eventually gets it to the hall and then realizes, oh, I can't just leave it here. So he proceeds to chase it down the hall towards a stairwell to the roof access, while still attempting to take off and signal his flock. The fact that this was his first response to having an avian guest audit his history class leads me to think it wasn't the first time this happened. TLDR was a tough teaching season for Bird Person. Story 21, kick a student. This was our chemistry teacher that a lot of students hated, mainly due to her grading and teaching style. She gave the AP Advanced Placement exam to students in her class who were completely lost. One day, while talking to a few high school friends, I heard that they fired her because she kicked a student. I completely understood that a student didn't take her, and she decided it was a good idea to kick him. Story 22, my 8th grade science teacher started to beat the out of one of the students. It is okay to do that in India, at least back then. This kid was big. At some point during the beating, he started to hit back, and pretty soon it turned into a full-fledged kickboxing. The kid beat the out of teacher. Story 23, I was helping out at a primary school 6 to 7-year-olds in this class, and the teacher was teaching basic maths. The topic was rounding numbers, and she insisted that the children should round down from 6 to the nearest 10. From 5 and up, you're meant to round up. I was a 13-year-old volunteer and felt unable to publicly correct her, though I really wanted to. Story 24 said the kitten is smaller than the cat because it is smaller. Earth science, I forget what we weren't supposed to be learning. Edit some words. Another edit, just remembered. We were learning relative dating. Story 25 had a history teacher in high school who was cream of the crop, well-versed about subjects, and made history very fun, extremely popular with students, with the majority of the school's teachers approaching retirement. This guy had the chance to become, at age 35, a top-ranked school's flagship teacher. Came out after I graduated that there were reports of inappropriate relations with a couple underage students, reports meaning these students confessed to our guidance counselor that they had been in those relationships with him. He and the school underwent a conscious uncoupling, and he's still unemployed right now, despite these issues not being made public. Really stupid thing to do. Story 26, on day during class, my algebra teacher said she smelled something funny in the classroom. She said it smelled almost kind of sweet, but also not good at the same time. She kept saying, I wonder what it is. Do you guys know? Maybe a new cleaner the janitor used. Nobody answered her, because we all knew someone was carrying weed in their backpack pocket, and no one wanted to explain to her what the smell was for fear of getting in trouble. Story 27, relieving teacher tried to tell the class that kilo is 103 and mega is 104. Cue me in detention for disagreeing. That started a trend for me. Looking back. Story 28, worked in tech services IT. Kindergarten teacher took the kids to the library and put them all on computers, talked to the kids about birds, specifically the blue-footed booby, then told the kids to search Google for pictures of boobies, called us in tears because she was sure she was going to get fired. Story 29, our math teacher basketball coach watched that movie Coach Carter a few too many times and started trying to be that guy from the movie. The first thing he did to try and make us have self-respect was forcing every guy in the classroom to tuck in their shirt. When someone pointed out he wasn't tucking in his shirt, he said the rules don't apply to him. Someone else suggested it's because he's not a guy. He lost his mind because he knew the only way out was to tuck his shirt in or be ridiculed by 14-year-old for the rest of the year. He took the high road and got insulted every now and then. Also, he stopped forcing people to tuck in their shirts after that. Story 30, on the coach trip back from a field trip, some of the class were playfully winding the teacher up, and he just lost it. He grabbed one of them by the throat and started strangling him. He only stopped when another teacher saw what was going on and calmly, but assertively intervened. The teacher realized his mistake immediately and sat himself with the lad's mates and joked with them for the remainder of the journey in the hope that they wouldn't report him. Work 2. Story 31, when I was in 3rd grade, I had the oldest and meanest teacher named MS, green fader, and she was the epitome of scary cat lady. She reeked of smoke, and after coming up from lunch, the whole classroom would stink like cigarettes and cheap air freshener. One day, I forgot my lunch in the classroom, so I was sent up to go grab it with another classmate. And when we walked in, we caught her smoking. She jumped and threw the cigarette into a trash bin full of paper, which began to smoke. She used the extinguisher and said nothing to us except for motioning to us to be quiet. Story 32, biology class, taught out of a book by the students. Teacher is getting ready to force us to do another 10 pages in 45 minutes. Students are being rowdy, talking a lot. Teacher starts talking over the class, yelling in. Then it gets quiet. To get us motivated, he goes on a long speech about how getting things done early gives us time to do many more things sooner. But he up at the end by saying every wasted second is a wasted second. It echoes through the class over and over like a chant. The teacher gets super red, like embarrassed. He didn't live it down the rest of the school year. Story 33. A coach subbing for a teacher who was out pulled a VCR tape from the cabinet labeled Rocky 3, I think, for us to watch, so he didn't have to teach us. He was having problems getting the VCR on the TV cart to work and around back asking the class to see if it was working, and we were like, no. Then he heard the video, started to play. It was called The Tower of Power. Not ever looking at the screen, he just sat down at his desk to relax. He couldn't see the screen from where his desk was, but he heard the woman saying me. He quickly shut off the tape. He took it immediately to the principal, and the tape was destroyed, or so they said, and the teacher was fired on his day off. Now this happened 1992, 1993, and you can IMDb The Tower of Power adult film for 1985. Story 34. One of my female teachers said to our primary 7 class, okay, a lot of you have been coming up to me and asking for help. I am your teacher. It's not my job to help you when you're stuck. Yes, really? Story 35. One of my high school English teachers separated the class into 2 groups, good kids and bad kids. She would only teach the good kids and let the bad kids do whatever they wanted because she couldn't control them. Story 36. We had a smartboard at one point, those kind that need special markers. We had a sub one day who let us know she knew we were all troublemakers and that she wouldn't listen to a thing we would say. At one point, she picks up an expo marker, which our normal teach had set across the room from the smartboard to keep them clearly separate. We try to tell her not to use it, but she literally screams at us until we are quiet. Then she draws all over the board and tried to erase it. The entire class got detention for misleading the sub. It held up for all of one class as we texted our parents about it. By the end of that class, 3 people, myself included, hadn't been checked out of school. All of our parents' legal guardians were raising in the office. Eventually, detention was lifted, and we all got apologies from the staff. The sub had to give a speech to us, apologizing to our faces. Admittedly, we probably all were a bit smug, but she lost it, started yelling racial slurs at us, called a few of us drug addicts and whores. Then finally, I'm not kidding, climbed out a window and left. Never saw her again. Story 37. We had a sub-teacher named Miss DeBell. She wasn't good at controlling the class, so most of the time everyone just chatted, goofed off. She kept doing that thing teachers do, where she'd stand at the front of the room in silence hoping we'd stop, but we just ignored her. Then she'd say, quiet down now, and we'd still ignore her. After a week of this, she was getting more and more pissed. She finally exploded at the end of the school day on Friday and gave us a speech about how we were disrespectful and rude, etc. The bell rang for the end of the day, and she was still going on. When a student eventually said, Miss, the bell has gone, she became convinced this kid had said, Miss, the bell has gone, and it was like that was the final straw. She kept us from leaving for 20 minutes, by which time we'd all missed our bus and had no way of getting home. It wasn't an official detention, and she had no right to keep us. The next day, she was fired. Story 38. When my friend, kindergarten student, really needed to go to the toilet, and they said no. A few minutes later, he asked again, saying he really needed to go, no. Then a few minutes later, he just wet himself and got scolded. Story 39. My year 8 maths teacher didn't know how to calculate the equation for a linear pattern. She taught the class that the method is to guess and check. I had to teach her how to calculate it. It's also important to note that her job wasn't just teaching maths. She had her own normal class, but for maths lessons, every student switches to their maths class. Story 40. I have to preface this one. This professor was amazing. One of, if not the best, I ever had. This was just a fucking dumb moment for him. It's nothing awful, just that I don't want anybody to think poorly of this amazing prof. I was in a networking class learning about subnets. I got tired of doing the math in head to figure things out on a test, and whipped out a calculator to just do it quickly. He came over and said, no calculators allowed. Confused, I asked him why. You might not always have one available, and need to be able to do it in your head. At this point, everybody in the class was paying attention. I pulled out my phone and waved vaguely to the rest of the computer lab. Name, hold up a minute, if I don't have a calculator available to me. What the am I doing figuring out a subnet? He paused for a moment, looked at the rest of the class, and announced calculators were allowed on the test. Dude really was an amazing prof, just got stuck in that old school mentality for a moment. Story 41. I had an algebra teacher in high school who frequented raves. We know this because of her public Instagram account and all the mostly photos of herself she had on there. Once one person found it, the whole school knew. After she realized we knew, she stopped caring about her professional image, started cussing at students in class, dressing as inappropriately as the students. Pretty sure she came in drunk at least twice. Not complaining, it was funny to watch. Edit, I'm not aware of her social media anymore. This was so long ago. But according to my his friends go to bars with her sometimes. Looks like she still teaches. Story 42, he helped a student jump his car after school. He hooked up the cables to the wrong terminals and fried the electronics in the student's car. He became the transportation supervisor later that year. Story 43, I'm a pretty short person due to a problem with my spine, so during high school was a lot shorter than most people in my class. Our school had this rule that you had to stand up when the teacher came in and do the whole good morning, Miss Whoever routine before being allowed to sit down. On one particular day, we had a substitute teacher who immediately called me out for not standing up, and when I told her she snapped at me for not respecting her. Now the rest of the class were well aware that I was just short, so they tried to tell her I was on my feet, but she just wasn't having it. She just continued yelling at all of us and threatening detentions if we didn't start showing respect. It went on until she lost it and came stomping around the table to prove I was still sitting. To find that I was actually on my feet, she kind of just cleared her throat, went quiet, and avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the class. Even to this day, her insistence that she was right and everyone else was wrong completely baffles me. Story 44, my web design teacher had us work on a server with a 10-person capacity in a 20-person class. Spanish teacher was a racist Southern woman who couldn't speak Spanish and tried to tell me that I was lying when I said I was Hispanic. So my Puerto Rican grandmother came down to the school and cussed her out. Thing is, the teacher taught my mother 20 years prior and did the same thing to my mom. This was the second time my grandmother had cussed out this teacher. I ended up teaching myself Swedish and Icelandic and would openly insult her in those languages near the end of the year. Story 45, my chemistry teacher in secondary school, high school for Americans lost his job because he seriously threatened some students who lost their printed handouts every end of the semester, including yelling at their parents on the phone. The vice principal found this out and requested that chemistry teacher should voluntarily resign. The result, he quit my school without any notice to the students and moved to another province. Story 46 took a point off of every assignment a kid turned in for spelling his name Nick instead of Nick. Kid never spoke up, and when it came out, she nearly lost her job. Story 47 had a substitute teacher who did crazy things whenever he came in, kicked the student's desk when the student put his head down on the desk, threw his copy of the textbook at the back wall to get the class to quiet down, and wrote us all up when no one immediately fetched the book for him. One time a friend told me the sub was checking out her legs, but she most likely told the principal and other teachers because he never taught us again. This was in 6th grade, by the way. So in the U.S., that's around 11 to 12 at ages. Story 48, we had a teacher in 4th grade who threw a shoe at a sleeping kid. This wasn't back in the day when that was okay either, and the lady who threw was like mid-30s. Story 49, theater class in the 11th grade. My best friend and I took it together. I was a chorus, extra, and stagehand kind of guy who could be relied upon to give a few lines convincingly and that I could sing well enough. But no more. My friend, though, was the star of the entire school, and rightly so. The kid could act. We were both pranksters, though, known for being disruptive and not behaving. But our school was so small, and the theater program less so, and the teachers just rolled with it. Our usual theater teacher left for unrelated reasons, but he warned the incoming new teacher, watch out for Stan and Bemechanized and his mate. Put them in their place quick so they don't goof off. Our first day with the new teacher, she gave us scenes she had brought to gauge some idea of our acting ability. Do the next day? Most people had something banal and easy. Mine was a large chunk of the St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V. My buddy got an utterly incomprehensible strain of gibberish. This woman literally typed up and printed a few pages of her mashing onto the keyboard and expected my friend to deliver it convincingly. It'll be damned if I didn't memorize that whole thing in a night and the next day pulled it off. Okay, Shakespeare is Shakespeare. It is its own realm in acting. New theater teacher picked apart my performance nevertheless. Gave me a bunch of unneeded tips. Told me maybe I should stick to being an extra while she was there. And my friend stepped up, pages in hand. The teacher's eyes were glowing, fresh off of her victory with me. She waited. Shineway Munico, he began, staring solemnly out into the crowd. Chwikwe, Jigawit so pinna, he went on, dramatically throwing aside the paper and delivering it from memory. And it was good, so good. The words meant nothing, but the emotion he conveyed was real. The whole time the class giggled, and the teacher grew more and more pissed. Finally, she told him to sit down, and without a word began the class. But after that, the entire student body was against her. She had tried to be a hard, mean, funny, and failed. Story 50, a Spanish teacher in my school was showing a YouTube video in class. School computers block YouTube. So he hooked his phone up to the board so they could watch it. Suddenly he gets a text and tries to swipe up on a message to get rid of it. He accidentally clicks on it, and messages comes up. The entire class sees the teacher's pic on his messages. Not only was there that, but the entire class found out he was gay because the person who he sent it to was named Matt. Story 51 Geography teacher doubled as the woodshop teacher. One day, he was working on a project while all the other students were doing the same. He was feeding into a table saw while also eating a slice of pizza. The act of eating a slice of pizza distracted him enough to saw off 3 fingers. And that is why my school no longer has shop. Fingers were reattached, and teacher returned to giving geography lessons. Story 52 A substitute teacher. Upon realizing the tape she was supposed to show us had been switched with hardcore pornography, started frantically pressing buttons on the remote control instead of just pulling the plug from the wall. We were watching full insertion on rewind, fast forward, and slow motion. Story 53 teacher here. It seems like a lot of this comes from teachers being uncomfortable with not being seen as knowing everything. The I Reach Advanced courses IB, for those of you who have heard of it. I teach psychology and a junior level of history. This semester, they asked me last minute to take over the senior level of history, covering topics I hadn't touched since college. I study ahead, prepare for lectures, etc. I also make it clear to the kids that this isn't my area of expertise yet, and any questions they have that I can't discuss, we look up together. Swallow your pride and stop making up. Fellow teachers, get it together. I go to Catholic school and was in religion class when my teacher asked, "What do animals and humans have in common?" I answered evolution. I was suspended for 3 days. Story 54 Once my English teacher argued canoeing is written without "e." It's such a stupid claim when you can take a dictionary and check it so easily. Right, but she said the dictionary is wrong and there might have been some mistakes during publication. On another day, she argued berry is not pronounced as it is. It should be pronounced with sound like German. So it'd be brie at a time when there were no smartphones and dictionaries might be wrong. Remember, we approached another English teacher. Knowing how crazy she can be, he said it depends on accent. Later, he congratulated me for standing up for what I think is correct and told me I was right. He just couldn't tell her face she was wrong. Edit grammatical errors. Story 55 One of my high school teachers was always getting on to people for loitering in the hallways. She was already in a rage and came down the hallway yelling at a group of students. The students ignored her, and she just kept yelling and pointing to move out of the way. Yeah, she was yelling at a group of deaf ed kids. She was mean in general, so this was extra hilarious. Story 56 had a gym teacher tell the class that we were to stand on the balance beam, grab the climbing ropes hanging from the ceiling, and swing out towards the center of the gym. Sounded reasonable, but any idiot could see that when you swung back and past the balance beam, you would slam into the chairs stacked against the wall. The teacher asked one student to demonstrate, and they got into an argument with the student challenging the teacher. Well, why don't you do it then? The teacher demonstrated it and promptly crashed into the stack of chairs, then stood up without saying a word and painfully shuffled out of the gym. Story 57. This was done by a student teacher at my high school. No one really liked her because she was cocky and rude. One student was talking back to her a bit, and she said, "Calm your titties." School board deemed her unfit for a teaching position, and she hasn't been back since. Story 58. My anatomy teacher was a bit of a psycho. One day at the end of class, while we were in the middle of dissecting fetal pigs, one lab group didn't clean their tools as instructed. The bell rings, and as students are filling out the classroom, she sees the mess. She begins screaming and throws a freaking scalpel across the room at the mass of students leaving. It hit a kid's backpack and bounced off harmlessly, fortunately, but that would have been a cute way to end a career: impale a student with a thrown scalpel that had just been used to cut into dead pigs. Story 59. Teacher of AV left a tape of himself in the VCR of his pet project, which was apparently him laying on a bed in his underwear, screaming at an aquarium. Story 60. I had a middle school teacher who was lecturing on the civil rights movement and didn't know how to spell assassinated, so she decided to shorten it. So there was on whiteboard Martin Luther King Jr. dash. Story 61. My 8th grade history teacher would get pissed at any alarms that went off during his class, screaming at the top of his lungs at the ceiling, pissed. After a tornado test drill, he imitated a tornado. He spun in circles up and down the rows of desks, knocking papers off of students' desks as he went. Story 62. During a school play in front of an audience of students and parents, one of our grumpy teachers had a speech to give, playing a Scot. Wearing a kilt, he put one foot up onto a chair and gave it his all. His testicles were hanging out of his underwear and dangled there for everyone to see. Story 63. Second grade teacher was, I had to stay in for recess every day the entire year. This was before I was diagnosed with severe ADHD. She favored girls over boys, so all the girls in class got good grades while the boys got held in for recess and bad grades. And since we couldn't go outside to expend out energy, we would get in trouble again and lose recess for the next day. Try being a kid that can't sit still and constantly getting in trouble for it. She got fired a few years after for similar complaints. Story 64, a teacher in my high school was showing a PowerPoint off of his personal laptop, and a notification bubble popped up on the screen in the bottom corner saying Super Squirter 16 is finished downloading.